what I wanted to say is that, just to repeat, I didn't expect of an artistic institution to come up with this concept and to invite us to provide terms and concepts within this conceptual framework. But I think this is not only interesting, it's actually very motivating, and it has something to do with the condition we live in today, which determines, of course, cultural production, artistic production, etc. And when I started to talk about, I didn't really know which concept I will choose and offer for the vocabulary, but then I simply realized that there are new terms already developed, which are, as I'm saying, completely new concepts of geopolitics that have been already introduced in Wikipedia. And I will give the first one. This will be the start of my of my talk. One of these concepts is very interesting. It is only 1 year old, and I don't know precisely since when it is in Wikipedia, but it was introduced in the review Foreign Policy in March a year ago, 2014, and the concept is the Cold War, the Second Cold War, Cold War II. Or it was introduced by Dmitry Trenin, article Welcome to the Cold War II. But it's, as I say, known as the New Cold War, and there is even a more sinister notion, a version of this new term. It is the Colder War. So the old Cold War is cold, but this one is the Colder War. And in Wikipedia, you will find the term refers, I'm quoting, to the renewed ongoing tensions, hostilities, and political rivalry that intensified dramatically in 2014 between the Russian Federation, United States, European Union, and it is about Ukrainian war, and it is about the occupation of Crimea. So it is this historical event that pushed the mind of the minds behind today, or the language of geopolitics, to transform, to keep up with the developments on the ground and come up with the new new concept. So the Cold War is back. Moreover, the geopolitics is also back on the agenda today, and it is improving its vocabulary nowadays, trying, as I'm saying, to keep up with the development on the ground, with these new transformations and new conditions. And we are obviously also expected to keep up with these developments and come up with our own concepts and terms. But I think that introducing the problem of geopolitics has also a certain element of a critique. At stake is what we can generally call left-wing, global left-wing politics, or a left political cause, as it has been articulated in last 25 years. As you probably know, this is quite remarkable for this period after the wall, after the fall of the so-called Berlin Wall, after the end of the First Cold War, that the left was actually not interested in geopolitics. The left politics was all about, changing the condition within the sphere of civil society, struggle for hegemony, mostly in the cultural field, within already given containers of powers, be it nation state, be it like European Union, etc., etc. But this is now obviously the time for the left to come back and to raise again the question about geo-economical and geopolitical constraints of an articulation of left-wing politics. This is a difference to the old left, which was focused on the questions of geopolitics. And some of these terms we will be talking these 2 days about have the genealogy of this old time when the left was very interested in as a colleague of mine, Alberto Toscano, would say, battle-hardened realism. And it is the problem of situating a left-wing politics and all these struggles into the reality of geopolitical constraints, as I said, which is economic competition in the world, scarcity of resources, biopolitics of population, and military calculations. This was not what in the last 25 years left-wing activism was thinking or talking about. So, and I would call that I would call it the certain post-historical turn. This is also the introduction or the fact that we are now discussing geopolitics is a symptom of a post-historical turn, which means that this period of post-history in which, as you know, there was actually no historical move was imagined during the last 25 years, and no historical move was actually imaginable outside the ultimate horizon of capitalism and the system of the so-called Western liberal democracy. You know, a year ago we celebrated 25 years of Fukuyama's proclamation of the end of history. And a year ago, these were the questions, well, was he right or no? I'm not answering now the question, because I think this is very challenging problem, whether what is happening now can be called a history in the old sense. Probably it is something new. We don't know how to call it. But anyway, the circle, this post-historical circle that started with the proclamation of the end of the Cold War is now, with the proclamation of the new Cold War, obviously is closed. This time, this period is over, and again, this is probably our discussion on geopolitics is also a symptom of this change. So, as you know, the left seemed for more than 20 years completely accepted the proclamation of historical closure and liberal democratic hegemony, situating all the struggles within this horizon. So, and this is why I'm suggesting, and I will now reveal what is my contribution to the vocabulary of geopolitics today. It is a notion of alignment. Alignment, which is, or notion, question, problem, phenomenon of alignment, and alignment is also back. As you know, we all remember in geopolitical terms, within the geopolitical vocabulary, alignment is being coined first as a pure, in terms of pure negativity, as non-alignment. You know, non-aligned movement. It's it's the beginning of the 50s when by an Indian politician coined first time. Then it became the ground on which the whole movement grounded its politics and ideology. But last year, and this is again something very interesting, how today the events have been accelerated. The last year, Narendra Modi, the new Prime Minister of India, announced the end of the non-alignment policy, the end of the paradigm of this, the major principle of Indian foreign politics, and introduced a new concept, multi-alignment, which is, this move is very interesting because while you can find how the non-aligned movement was ideologically defined, you would find like 5 principles. We will discuss it in the next day. Today, there are no principles. How it is described, how it is defined, it's very, very significant. Or multi-alignment is, and I quote, doing business with all. This is the new paradigm of Indian politics. But multi-alignment is not the concept I'm suggesting, but alignment. I think that this move from non-alignment to multi-alignment implies necessarily other concepts or processes of realignment and of de-alignment. So this is why I'm suggesting that this sort of core concept of alignment, and then we can discuss the processes of realignment and de-alignment, etc. I would even claim that the geopolitical process of realignment is crucial in understanding the world after the fall of the so-called historical communism, the end of the Cold War first, 89-90. Concretely, the process of the so-called post-communist transition to democracy. We are in space that has been for 25 years, probably still has been perceived in terms of a post-communist space, still a post-communist space. If this space is defined in terms of a historical process, this historical process was understood as a transition from communism, despotic rule, one-party system, social welfare state, to what is called liberal democracy. But at the same time, this process was a process of a certain realignment. And this is what I will be talking about. And I will focus now on one aspect or one form of this process, general process of realignment, which is, I would call it a translation. Translation as a form of realignment. As you know, translation is a quite important concept for a post-colonial theory, and a concept which I have been dealing with theoretically for years. And this is why I want to think of geopolitics via the idea of translation, because translation is a form of realignment, or realignment has the form also of a certain translation. First, if I say translation, you immediately think of a linguistic translation, and you are right. But I will tell you, this will be a very concrete example of how linguistic translation was immediately deployed as more than linguistic, as cultural, political translation, or as I would say, as certain alignment. 1990, it was still former Yugoslavia. I was in Zagreb. I was young translator, and already 1990, after only a month after the first election, the translators in Croatia, they all were asked or invited to provide their knowledge and practices. So there was a lot to translate, linguistically translate. And I also was paid to translate the laws, Austrian laws, that regulated the functioning of Viennese Burgtheater. So I was translating from German these laws, and these laws were directly applied on the Croatian National Theatre in Zagreb. What was interesting at that time, you know, this is, of course, this was how transition to democracy was perceived. And today you would think, well, this implies, you know, the transition from the so-called state property or state-controlled economy and culture to private, to free cultural production, etc., etc. But actually the fact was that this translation made possible the nationalization of the Croatian National Theatre, or etatization. With this translation, it was the state that became, so to say, the owner of this cultural institution and got the right to choose the artistic director of the theater. In the previous Yugoslav system, the theater was not a state institution. It was owned by the workers there, by actors, directors, all who worked there. And they had the right to choose within the ideological system, but legally the right to choose their artistic director. I was reminded of what actually happened a few years ago, as you remember, in Italy, the occupation of theaters all over Italy, and one of the main causes was that these theaters were actually state-owned, so that the local politician representing the state would have a huge influence of the politics of theater, while those who were working in the theater had, so to say, no, but still don't have any say in for instance, choosing artistic director of the theater. I'm just wanting, what I'm now saying is that these processes were very contradictory and ambiguous. They implied changes which cannot be understood within this simple framework of post-communist transition from, you know, state-controlled society culture to liberal, democratic, free culture. Also in terms of economy. But what the problem was that actually there was no more connection, and there is no more connection today between this experience of non-state state-owned theater and functioning and the role of people making and producing culture, this, what was actually the legacy of former Yugoslav system, has been completely erased. So that even the struggles, left struggles in Italy cannot claim any sort of historical legacy. Even we don't claim this historical legacy. But my translation, as I would say, had nothing to do with introducing democracy, with improving certain situation, cultural situation, improving in terms of freedom or another liberal qualities, but it had to do, has had to do something with a realignment of the cultural production of a society of this country in realignment in terms of moving, changing certain geopolitical position. And this is, so it has succeeded in aligning Croatian cultural infrastructure into the new European order. And it facilitated the move from the past, and the past was actually perceived in terms of the East, to the contemporaneity, which is the West. So this is what actually has happened, and what was the aim or the ultimate task of my linguistic translations. It was in fact a very simple realignment of the conditions of cultural production, certain conditions of cultural production. But this is not only a geopolitical effect of a linguistic translation. Linguistic translations themselves have themselves a geopolitical dimension. And this is mostly forgotten when we speak of translation. We can discuss it probably later. Even the very idea of linguistic translation implies certain alignment which is ideological and which is definitely political. As you know, we think of translation as a linguistic practice that bridges the gap between two communities that speak different languages. And we perceive these communities in terms of area of language. You know, this is the idea that a language belongs to a certain area, and that translation is a linguistic practice that connects two different areas. This is the idea of homolinguality. Homolinguality, this is the way we perceive a language as an enclosed unity with clear limits and borders, so that translation is a practice that happens so to take place outside of a language, as though there are no translations within, and as though, like, you know, Slovenian and German, when you understanding translation in that way, you always have the implied impression that Slovenian and German language first meet in the moment, at the moment of the translation. This is the ideological effect of a certain, very particular and politically clearly aligned concept of translation, the ideology of homolinguality. So every time we understand translation in these terms, we align ourselves. We align ourselves to certain area. Then I would say my mother tongue is Croatian, I belong to this area, which is can be clearly differentiated from the Slovenian area, Hungarian area, Austrian, etc., German, etc., etc., etc. Every translation implies alignment, cultural and political alignment, so that this sort of understanding is part of our experience. We simply accept as normal, as given. But it has had always very clear political consequences. Not only that, translation is not an innocent, geopolitically innocent linguistic practice. Translations have a geopolitical dimension. There is something called the world system of translations. And even UNESCO did a survey and collected data, and I will quote a little bit. There are very interesting facts about who translate, how translation, the practice, today's practice in today's world of translations, how this practice reflects the power relation in the world. So, if you imagine, it's not only we always think of languages in terms of this commensurability. So all languages are somehow equal. So Slovenian and English are equal, and they can be compared and translated one into another. This is how the idea of translation reflects this geopolitical old system, so-called Westphalian order of, cluster of separate sovereign nation state and juridical system within this order. So let me give you a few facts about it. Actually, annually, about 80,000 books are translated from and into 200 languages. But 55 to 60% of these books are translated into English and from English. So this is English occupies in the world system of translation, as the theorists defined it, hypercentral position. Not even a central position, because it's more than half of all translations take place in English. After English, there are only two languages in the world that occupy so-called central position: German and French, each 10% of all of these translations. Then, Spain, for instance, doesn't belong. Although a continent speaks the Spanish, doesn't belong to this central position, which is very important if you think. If I wouldn't have written my book in German, I'm sure it wouldn't have been translated into Slovenian. This is a certain economy of translation that defines the dissemination of ideas. So, and then there is a third level. There are 7 to 8 languages. They have the semi-central position, and they have a share of 1 to 3% of world market. And this is Spanish, Italian, and Russian. And then there are peripheral languages, not only Slovenian. Arabic is a peripheral language. Chinese, the most spoken language in the world, is less than 1% translations, which is peripheral languages as a Slovenian, Croatian, etc., etc. So you see that the structure is hierarchical, with huge differences. And this hierarchy has changed historically. For instance, during the Cold War, Russian occupied also the so-called central position. 10% of translations were made from Russian, but it has changed after the fall of the wall. So English language at that time only 40%, raised to 60%. But what is more, you know, these data are very interesting, these statistics, because it is not only about languages. There is a certain the higher position of a language in the this world system, it has a lower share in translations altogether within the language. For instance, in United States, only 2 to 3% of all books published in United States are translations. The rest is written originally in English. So this is, I don't know how much it is, but small languages translate massively, and there are so many translations among the published books. But look, in Netherlands, 3 out of 4 translations are from English. So even if, you know, there are quite a lot of translations, they are from English. So what I'm saying that both, you know, in terms of the very idea of translation, we always align ourselves not only into these different linguistic areas that correspond with different nation states, cultures, containers, you know, of our cultures and identities. We also occupy a certain position in the hierarchy of these world languages, so-called cultures, etc. And this is why I think that, in other words, by simple linguistic translations, we align ourselves according to this existing hierarchy. No translation takes place out of a geopolitical frame, which corresponds to the existing power relations in the world. It is in fact, mostly the alignment with the West, which mother tongue is English. But if you think of the who, and I mentioned that the post-communist transition began for me with a very simple linguistic translation, which had huge consequences. But generally, in terms of the post-communist transition in the so-called Eastern Europe, it won't be difficult for you to understand the whole process in terms of realignment. Not only, you know, from the East to the West. I remember also at that time in Croatia, we were still part of Yugoslavia, and a sociological institute in Zagreb analyzed the writing of one daily, Vjesnik, and within 1 year, and I was within the project analyzing how the notion of Europe was mentioned. And according to my analysis, the whole transition to democracy was simply the alignment with Europe. It was about the alignment from the so-called Balkans and realignment with Europe, in realignment because this is, you know, this classical claim. We have always belonged to Europe, so we are now coming back to where we truly belong. So think of it when it comes to very dramatic political situations today, which is the crisis, the refugee crisis, the crisis of the European Union, but think of the process so-called the enlargement of the European Union, the major, in fact, geopolitical process of the post-communist transition, and the enlargement of NATO. These two, the so-called, this fantastic, this could be very interesting concept for geopolitical vocabulary, the so-called Euro-Atlantic integration. People coming from probably Eastern Europe, they know what this means. It is always, for me, it was so funny, you know, you are somewhere in Croatia, what Atlantic has to do with democracy, you know? But it means something very clear. You align the country with NATO pact, with more than Europe, which is the West, which is America, etc., etc. So, one of the results was as I said, this alignment had this form of translation, and this traditional understanding of translation, homolingual understanding of translation, is based on the idea of binary relation between the so-called original and the copy. The translation is perceived as a secondary production of an original. Concretely, translating the East into the West, you don't simply become an original. You become a good copy, a good translation. The original is even precisely through this process essentialized. The West becomes essentialized through the process of a translation perceived as a simple relation between the original and its secondary production and copy. Translation of the West into the East. So we have then actually to deal with essentialized concept of the West. So the problem is that the notions like freedom, democracy, justice, progress, tolerance, peace, etc. have lost not only their universal meaning because they are culturally localized. Because you become free not simply by doing this or that, by challenging the power, by a revolution, be it a velvet one, revolution. You become free by westernizing yourself, by moving, by realigning yourself, which is big contradiction. At the same time, these values, supposed to be universal, are culturally localized. They are Western values, although they are supposed to be universal. This is the contradiction we have been living all the time with. So, but the problem is that they not only in that way use their universal meaning, they got rid of their utopian character. Their openness towards the new and generally towards the future, to what does not exist yet. They are completely cut from this utopian element. Think of probably the famous definition of the so-called democratic revolutions 89-90 given by Jürgen Habermas. He called it already 1990 die nachholende Revolution, the catching up revolution. The idea is that the countries and societies under the communist rule were prevented to have a normal historical development so that they are belated in terms of modernity. So that the process of transition is actually the process of catching up with the missed development. The problem is, of course, that you have one area which is belated, which has to catch up, which has to move to align itself to another area which is always already on its place, which doesn't have to move, which is beyond history because it is the measure of the history, while the other has to get rid of its history, which precisely was the case of my linguistic translations of the laws of Burgtheater, laws into the institution of Croatian National Theatre. The whole history of the social struggles that have achieved the moment or the value, the right of participation has been completely erased. Because if you are in the East, you have history, but a history, as Rastko Močnik would say, should be better forgotten. You have to get rid of it because it's of no value whatsoever. So you have this relation, and this is what alignment is about. It's about getting rid of the past, which has no value, and implies impossibility actually to have a legacy, historical legacy, and to be able to articulate any sort of historical experience. Because you cannot have historical experience because it's wrong. You know, since it is wrong, you have to forget it and apply and the translated values. So, so that in this way, every conceivable historical progression, a historical move towards the better, you know, just think really in Kantian terms, towards the better. This is what the idea of eternal peace was. And if you would analyze the principles of non-alignment, of non-aligned movement, you would precisely see that these anti-colonial third world societies were at that time still able to think in Kantian terms, in the terms of a vision of certain better world of peace and cooperation beyond the war, called at that time Cold War. So it was actually India following, you know, this having or re-articulating India, not only India, actually former Yugoslavia, and then these third world countries re-articulating the legacy, the very European legacy of enlightenment and freedom, contrary to the powers of the Cold War, which is now it is erased. You know, when Modi talks about multi-alignment, he means pragmatical dealing with the given situation, and so. In this way, every conceivable historical progression, a historical move towards the better, has become a simple move towards the West or Europe. Or, you know, the vision of a movement toward the better is simply a process of alignment or realignment. To be involved in a historical process, to become historical, means now only to align with the West, while the West itself ceased to move altogether and is perceived to be in a sort of ahistorical standstill. It is now only a name for an ahistorical container of essentialized values, a normative identity block on the top of the world. So, but let's come back into this crisis today, into these masses of refugees coming from the chaos and seeking refuge in Europe, and try to think a little bit in terms of genealogy, political, geopolitical, historical genealogy of these events, which are now cannot be avoided. They are now coming today from Croatia to Slovenia, so they will be here tomorrow. So the wave, tidal wave, is coming. How it started. I come back to this alleged end of the Cold War, to the beginning of the process of the so-called post-communist transition. And if and you will for sure remember, there is a person that symbolically personified this liberation, this movement toward the better, as it was seen at the moment when we saw these masses of East Germans finally coming over the Berlin Wall into the free world, and all these masses that finally succeeded in liberating themselves from the despotic rule of one-party system, etc., etc., etc. And you would agree, the person who personified the best of this historical transformation is probably Václav Havel. You know, it's such a beautiful, innocent symbol of certain historical innocence. Even the revolution is called Velvet Revolution, without blood. It's such a difference to what happened in former Yugoslavia. So he's a certain, I would call, they call it angelic vision of politics. He's the angel of the historical transformation. But Havel's name stands symbolically not only for the success of the democratic revolution, but also for the whole post-revolutionary, post-communist order. But the name also, Václav Havel, plays a crucial role, this is what I'm claiming now, in the genealogy of the geopolitical crisis today that has become visible as the crisis of European Union and the refugee crisis. Let me now remind you of something we all have probably forgotten, of the role Havel played in creating today's global political condition. At the end of January 2003, Václav Havel was among the leaders of 8 European states who issued a joint declaration of support for the US-led military intervention in Iraq. Just to remind you who were the Aznar of Spain, Barroso of Portugal, Silvio Berlusconi in Italy, Tony Blair, Peter Medvedev, Hungary, Leszek Miller, Poland, Rasmussen, Denmark. Some of these countries are, the toughest now when the refugees come. Look at Hungary, look at Denmark, but so they issued the so-called letter of aid, and in the statement they hailed the so-called transatlantic bond. As you know, at that time even Germany didn't want to support the war in Iraq. So, in the statement, they hailed the so-called transatlantic bond as, I quote, a guarantee of our freedom, transatlantic, Euro-Atlantic integration. At stake is, of course, the bond between the United States and Europe, which, as the authors want us to believe, consists of shared values, I quote, democracy, individual freedom, human rights, and the rule of law. Values that once, I quote, they wrote, crossed the Atlantic with those who sailed from Europe to help create the USA. So just imagine this picture of these ships carrying not the refugees from Europe, refugees from a civil war in England. Actually, this is the, but actually they were carrying the values to the. It is, of course, it's completely forgotten that the ships were carrying slaves for 200 years. Not only values to the states, but this is the perspective of the 90s, of the geopolitics of the 90s. In the former Yugoslavia, Frantz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth, was immediately translated. Yugoslavia supported Algiers, anti-colonial movements, and I remember when I studied philosophy in Zagreb, we had translations of Frantz Fanon, and it was the literature I had to read, The Wretched of the Earth, to pass my exams in former Yugoslavia, just to quote from Frantz Fanon, a radically different perspective on this issue of traveling values between Europe and America, the anti-colonial one. I quote, 2 centuries ago, a former European colony decided to catch up with Europe. It succeeded so well that the United States of America became a monster in which the taints, the sickness, and the inhumanity of Europe have grown to appalling dimensions. Just, juxtapose these two, Havel and Fanon. This is what sort of historical change this implies in terms of, move from non-alignment into what I say, different forms of alignment. So as you know, the Iraq was attacked because Havel and they wrote that these terrorists whom the West vows to fight in Iraq were defined simply as the enemies of the values. So there are the values, essentialized Western values, and terrorism is who is against these values. This is how they were defined. This is September 11th, 2001 World Trade Center attacks showed, I quote Havel, how far they are prepared to go, yet there is no reason to worry. The signatories of the declaration assure us that the governments and people of the United States and Europe stand firm in defense of their common values. All that remains, as it was said that, is to rid the world of the danger posed by Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. There were not, of course, weapons of mass destruction, but this was this political move, political decision, the ideological, within this ideological framework happened something that should be, in terms of historical genealogy, now recognized as genealogy of the problems we are facing now. So, ideologically, the statement is also grounded in the common platitude of Europe being liberated from the 2 totalitarianisms, Nazism and communism. This is the crucial ideological, the very core of this vision is that Europe and the world after 1890 is not only liberated from communist totalitarianism, but from both totalitarianisms, which are equally criminal retroactively. This is the very core, ideological core of today's European Union. Just to remind you that 2009, European Parliament adopted on the 2nd April 2009 a political declaration by vast majority of votes which condemned all the totalitarian crimes and called for the recognition of communism, Nazism, and fascism, I quote, as a shared legacy. So this is the very core of European of the ideology on which the European unification is based. This means, today when you see the political dynamics, for instance, in Croatia, which is all about, fighting communism and Tito, so many years after both disappeared, this is aligning with this ideological core, saying that Tito, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, all are equal and we are different and better, essentially better. We belong to different world, which is the European Union, liberated from both totalitarianisms. Of course, historically we know that this idea has also its author, Emil Nolte, and just to remind you of German Historikerstreit, the so-called historians fight or quarrel in the late 80s in West Germany, and Ernst Nolte published this famous article interpreting Nazism as a sort of overreaction to the Bolshevik threat, so that Auschwitz is Hitler's overreaction to the threat of Gulag. This was during the 80s. It was Emil Nolte who came up with this thesis, but at that time he was immediately attacked by still strong German liberal intellectuals led by Habermas, and we believed for many years that it was the defeat of the concept at that time. But we now see that the concept not only has survived, it has become hegemonic, and it has entered the official documents of the European Union. There are textbooks by Italian historian Domenico Losurdo on historical revisionism, who actually explained the whole very long tradition of historical revisionism. Just to put it very, very short, the problem is not the Gulag, that is the primal crime. It goes back, the historical revisionism, and the primal crime is actually not even the French Revolution, but the philosophers of Enlightenment who initiated the process to which Europe would have to respond by overreacting with Auschwitz, Nazism, etc. So I'm simply telling that historical revisionism is at the very core of a European ideology, with all the consequences. So it is therefore not by coincidence that Silvio Berlusconi was also among the signatories of this declaration, 2003. In September the same year, he would provoke, and you probably remember, a public outcry by claiming that Benito Mussolini had never killed anyone, but had just sent people on holiday to confine them. This is what Berlusconi said. And in 1990, I analyzed the translations of late Croatian President Tudjman, his famous book on history. I forgot what is the English translation of this. Is his major work. I analyzed it in Vienna, and I found that English and German translation differ significantly when it comes to the concentration camps in Croatia. So in English version, you would have like a realistic presentation of what happened, but in German version, you would have the story that there are actually no proof of Ustasha crimes in Jasenovac, that Jews were mostly killed and tortured by Jews in Jasenovac, that they were actually playing operettas there, etc., etc., etc. This was in the German translation, but not in the American. And in the German translation, there was this fantastic thesis that the stability and prosperity of Germany today is grounded on the fact that they got rid of their minority, which is Jewish minority. This was published in the book of the president, who was then immediately, and as a Croatia, recognized by the European Union, etc., etc., etc. But Tudjman was thinking geopolitically already, and not to provoke American Jews, he changed the translation, English translation. But since there are no longer Jews, and he was addressing the right-wing German historical revisionists, he fully re-articulated what he wrote for a Croatian audience. So, thinking of realignment, and he succeeded, you know, because Croatia was immediately involved into the Euro-Atlantic integrations. So, but just to one more element, few years earlier, October 1999, Václav Havel was invited to Washington to give an address after receiving the Fulbright Prize. You know, it was at Clinton, time of Clinton. And the title of his speech was The Charms of NATO. The title of his was Charms of NATO. He namely used the occasion to welcome the decision to include 3 Eastern European nations, Poland, Hungary, and Czech Republic, into the Western Military Alliance. He enthusiastically called for America to assume its responsibility for the whole world. For Havel, I quote, "Only the United States can save our global civilization by acting on the premises imbued with its values that should be adopted," this is a quote, "adopted by all cultures, all nations as a condition of their survival." So if you want to survive, you have to align yourself with the West. This is the question, you know, this is a matter of survival. It is not a matter of free will. A year and a half later, NATO, as you know, 99, bombed Serbia. Serbia, it was a humanitarian so-called humanitarian intervention, and Donald Rumsfeld was talking at that time about New Europe in terms of old Europe. New Europe are today those who radically oppose the influx of refugees. This is the former Eastern Europe. And just to remind you, Serbia was bombed, and similarly to the Dayton Agreement, which brought peace to Bosnia, we had certain pacification of the situation. It is not yet clear what the political logic of the intervention was. Was it helping a minority, a separation from a sovereign state, or it was a humanitarian help? We don't know. But as you know, since that time, since 96, Dayton Agreement, since 2000, there hasn't been a political solution found for these spaces. Instead of that, we have this chaotic, forgotten space of semi-nation state. Actually, there is a commissar by the European Union who is stronger juridically than the parliaments there. And we have, Macedonia without the name, without a name. And we don't know what is Kosovo. Is it a sovereign state? Is it part of this or that, of Albania, of international community, of European Union? We don't know, but all we know is that it is somehow good. So if people move to Europe, they will be expelled. They will be not recognized as refugees because it's good. So I'm just telling about this chaotic order, and at that moment it comes to my mind one quote by Giorgio Agamben in his Homo Sacer, when he writes about this bloody dissolution of former Yugoslavia, and he writes about this generally, he writes generally not about the violent dissolution of former Yugoslavia, but about chaotic dissolution of the systems in Eastern Europe following the collapse of communism. According to Agamben, we shouldn't understand these events as a sort of a temporary regression into the state of nature, which will sooner or later return to normality, as it is suggested within the concept of transition. You know, it's the so-called illnesses of the transition, but then sooner or later it will be normal and good. But, as he explicitly says, these events are bloody messengers of the new nomos of the earth, which is going to spread all over the globe. And mentioning the new nomos, of course, I am invoking Carl Schmitt, the German theorist of juridical theories, but also a philosopher, and his concept of the new nomos of the earth in the 30s already. He was sort of Nazi theorist and later supported, as you know, General Franco, and I would even say that the definition of the liberation from communism follows the pattern, ideological pattern of the Spanish Civil War, which was understood, presented, not only by Franco, but also by Carl Schmitt, as national liberation from communism, as being, you know, universalist ideology of migrants, emigrants, as he would say. Repeating this partisan Spanish war against Napoleon, against revolution. And if you would analyze the discourse of liberation, post-communist liberation, it is always about liberation of a nation from a communism, as though communism was some sort of an alien, foreign power at a certain historical moment entered and occupied the nation, only to be finally expelled from the nation back. This is how in Croatia they would call it Serbo-communism. So communism was something Serbian. Of course, Serbs would call it as a Vatican complot, because it's a Catholic internationalism. And you know, all East European nations understood it as a foreign occupation, which is perfect. It expels from its history all the contradictions and the history and legacy of social struggles. If you say it's a foreign rule, so and it finally, you know, it has become it became. The contradictio in adjecto when the Russians finally, when Russians claimed the end of communism, and under Yeltsin, the masses in Moscow wanted to quit with the Soviet Union and liberated themselves from the foreign rule. So, but what is the nomos, Carl Schmitt's new nomos of the earth? It's a spatial, juridical, and political ordering that would terminate the anarchy that followed upon the disintegration of Jus Publicum Europaeum, or the concrete, Eurocentric, interstate, spatial, legal order, nomos, the European state system which spanned from the 16th to the early 20th century. In fact, the so-called Westphalian order, after the Treaty of Westphalia, you know, introducing the principles of the sovereignty of the nation state and its self-determination, legal equality among nation states, the reign of international laws among the states, the non-intervention of one state in the domestic affairs of another, reminding us of non-alignment movement and the principles. But anyway, Schmitt, it was the deterritorialization of a Eurocentric global politics by communist revolution and by decolonization which brought this chaos, according to Schmitt. And Hitler intervened into this chaos to prevent chaos. So it is his distinctly reactionary or counter-revolutionary concern for the primacy of the order against the chaos. But he, Schmidt, envisioned a post-Eurocentric order of great spaces, Großräume, in which Europe too will have its order place. So this is probably what Modi thinks when he speaks about multi-alignment, world divided into the Schmittian Großräume, into the large areas, and the rest has to align either to one or to another. And this is what actually is, if you see what all these chaotic wars and conflicts from former Yugoslavia via the Northern Africa, Middle East, especially Iraq, Syria, and including Ukraine, the processes of new realignment and disalignment, which I would even go so far and think of the Islamic State as the concept of disalignment from the West, geopolitically speaking. And we see the new fault lines, which according to Carl Schmitt, this is everything is okay, it is under control. We must go through this chaos so to have finally this new nomos on the earth established, in which everybody would know to which space, Großraum, a country, a society, a culture, individual belongs. And this is, here I will end, and was a bit too long, I'm sorry, but I wanted to address so many things, but okay, thank you.
Are there any questions, comments?
I obviously, okay, yes.
Actually, my name is Man Rui Xu. I'm from Taipei. I really quite don't get what the point you want to make. On the one hand, geopolitics in general is a very statist, very nationalist concept. So if we say alignment, are we talking about alignment of the leftist, the grassroots, or cultural workers across different borders? Or are we talking about alignments to different historical period, particularly since the 19th century, the late 19th century, when geopolitics was first invented, by the British Empire and the German Empire, and up to like a Cold War period, post-Cold War until now? Or are we talking about like lower level like alignment? And so this is by itself, it's a very, I think, crucial question to ask. But in your case, you mentioned too many things. Like on one hand, most of the cases are statist, very nationalist, especially related to the old empire and so on. And then when we come to the question here, I don't know, because I came here with the invitation like very late, and I didn't really quite get into the whole kind of scenario yet. But my assumption is alignment or like this kind of geopolitics cross borders, particularly under more like lower or cultural leftist. So this is a kind of a perspective I cannot really quite get. Secondly, translation. has been used as a tool for most empires. Particularly, in the past already, like Chinese translation of the Buddhist text, the Buddhist classic, it went through for a few centuries, from the 4th until like 8th or 10th century. In that way, actually, Chinese created its own like Chinese Buddhism, and that is very important because during that whole period, the whole Chinese culture went through different kind of warring like dynasties, and then so it's very important for the big empire to think about how to survive, and that is one of the key issue mentioned during especially the Tang Dynasty, to send out their monks to India to import all the Indian, especially Buddhist texts, and then make a massive translation. So this is I don't know. I mean, secondly, when we talk about translation, it's also related to history of anthropology. Normally, especially we say anthropology from the 19th century up to the 20th century. It is basically the colonizers who are translating the colonized. And this is very important tools for colonization, translation. So I don't know how is it related to, in this case, to the alignment, especially colonizers' translation. Actually, if you see it from a kind of post-history perspective, it becomes interesting. A lot of ancient, the distinct, the disappeared languages actually are kept, because of the colonization rule. And so another example to give is Japanese, for example, because you mentioned many different examples, but the Japanese, since they are like the modernization in the 19th century, they made or started already a huge industry of translating texts from the West, from everywhere. So that the translation, the different languages into Japanese is a very important way to forge their modern identity. So these are like examples. Like I don't know how it is now integrated into your argument.
Yeah, I will respond addressing. I will simplify it and address two elements. The first one is that I use the concept of alignment as a certain terminus technicus within the transformation of the vocabulary, recent transformation of the vocabulary of geopolitics, which implies this move from the old world, with so-called equal nation states, the cluster of the world imagined as a cluster of nation states, of languages, all equal, all different, all equal. This multicultural vision of the world corresponding to actually geopolitical Westphalian order. What I'm arguing is that now we are in a process of realignment into a post-Westphalian order, which is probably this idea, Carl Schmitt's, of a new nomos, of alignment with this new, I don't call it imperium, I don't know whether Russia or Eurasia as the ideological concept behind Putin's geopolitical claims, whether it is an imperium or not. I don't know whether India thinks of itself as an imperium or not, but they think obviously in terms of these spaces. This is something that is new, and this implies also certain move in terms of translation. Just to remind you, it is long ago that actually European intellectuals have has started to think differently about Europe and the languages, relation and translational practice of within the European Union. One of the leading German philosopher of German theory of language, from the Romanticists, from Humboldt until especially Humboldt expert Jürgen Trabant calls it the revernacularization of the European linguistic space. What is this? It reminds the situation today, even when it comes to these so-called central languages as German and French, that these languages lose the power to compete with English within the European Union, within the nation states. They become a sort of vernaculars. Like in the Middle Ages, you would have all non-yet national languages spoken everywhere. It is the time when translation was not perceived in terms of homolinguality. If you would translate, you wouldn't do it as though you belonged to a certain area. Because there was Roman continuity from Sicily to Brussels, without, space of Italian language, space of French, space of Spanish, etc. People would move through the space, constantly translating, without perceiving themselves or thinking of moving through linguistic areas. They would not. This idea that it's relatively new. It is the ideological product of the concept of nation state. It implies different forms of translation, different treatment of language, and different relation between sociality and linguistic practices. For instance, in the Middle Ages, it's completely normal that two armies clashes, the general of army and other generals within one army speak different languages, translate among themselves. The king speaks, again, different languages, and different units speak different languages. So when there is a peace treaty signed, then come translators, to translate it into, the infantry, Swiss infantry get this translation, Italian condottiers another, etc., etc. It was completely normal. Nobody thought, I fight for this language against this language, belong to this. This is the law. And now he speaks Trabant of revernacularization. And he believes that Germany and France, he addresses concretely the most powerful, should do what is still possible to prevent it and to save the uniqueness of their national languages, although he has no illusions, because European Union had a commissioner even many years ago who had this task, but it has failed, and the concept was abandoned. So that you have the fact that living in Germany and teaching in Germany doesn't mean to speak German. For me, I almost no use German in teaching. But this is what. So, and I think that this transformation implies certain geopolitical transformation, and that this new geopolitical condition needs new vocabulary. This is why we have been gathering here to help the world to understand what has been happening to it or to us, including what I tried, including really to understand this genealogy, also geopolitical genealogy of the crisis of both European Union as a concept, as an area, as the better future of the world, and the fact that on the fringes of Europe you don't have any order. You have the violent processes of de-alignment and realignment, as I would say.
Yes, may I get back to this, what you just, I would like to get back to this subtopic you told, the genealogy, that we should know what is the genealogy. And I just was thinking about what can we do with this genealogy? Because one possible answer could be that we got what we deserve, right? The second could be that, that there are people who recognize what is this genealogy. This is, for example, in Hungary. I am from Hungary. This is the extreme right wing. And they are speaking about this genealogy, that this was caused by the irresponsible politics of the US and all those who allied with him. And there is consequence of this rhetoric and this consciousness of this genealogy. This is the alignment, using your terminology, with Putin's Russia and turning towards East. So this is the second possible answer. The third for me, if we are speaking about this whole phraseology, I, in a way, missing from this scenario the word beyond Europe and the Euro-Atlantic alliance, as if Latin America would not exist, not on the map, Australia, Asia, not on the map, Africa, absolutely forget about. Just so, this is a missing element. And then one more, that you told also that this utopic notion disappeared. And I do believe that because this utopic notion disappeared, this is the void where all this extreme nationalism puts its own imagination. So there is a void, and they can fit perfectly into this void. So I just do not know what to do with this genealogy.
Thank you for the question. I will especially when you address this alignment of today's ideological alignment of today's Hungary with Putin's Russia, and you described it as a alignment with the East. With the East, I would say you are very optimistic. I would offer you another more sinister option. It is about the changing of the very core of what is the West. It probably sees what is good in Putin's form of fascism and new imperialism, but it aligns itself with what I said, that is the ideological core of the European Union, the ideology of the so-called post-totalitarian order. Just to remind you that Alain Badiou, writing this essay on Sarkozy, asking for what is Sarkozy, the name actually, speaks of the Petanization of Europe. And here, speaking in Ljubljana, just to remind you that when Bosnian refugees in the early 90s came to Ljubljana, they published here, they had a magazine and one Slovenian journalist writing about this magazine of the Bosnian refugees. They were massively, I don't know how many, but they were here, similarly to what is happening now. And he wrote this sentence, I think it was in Delo, in a daily, that we shouldn't forget that Europe, he was speaking critically about Europe, leaving Slovenia, so to say, alone with the refugees, not helping, not taking more, etc., etc. And in his disappointment, he writes, we shouldn't forget that Europe was already united under the fascist rule, when almost all states were collaborating with Adolf Hitler and Mussolini, and when even, you know, Croatian soldiers fighting in Stalingrad didn't do it in the name of Gross Deutschland, of Greater Germany, but in the name of protecting European values from Asiatic, barbaric, communist despotism. This was they were killing and dying and fighting in Stalingrad in the name of Europe, united already in the 40s, when there were no significant resistance in Europe except in former Yugoslavia and Greece, in significant form, and in France, but cannot be compared to both partisan movements. And just to remind you, Carl Schmitt later writes his book on the logic of the partisan, and attacking this logic as the worst. This is the partisans, and the ideology of the partisans is absolutely the evil of the world. And he actually gives in Franco's Spain his lectures on the logic of partisan. This is just to remind you, it could well be that Urban has his visions of Europe to come reaches far more than simply and quickly translated economic interest into humanism of Angela Merkel.
Excuse me, could you repeat your last sentence?
Yeah, I don't know whether I'm precise that the ideology of Viktor Orban has much more to do with a vision of a European future, as I say, sinister for me, not for him, a vision of a European future which is much better articulated than this simple, direct translation of an economic interest into universal humanist value done by German positions today by Angela Merkel. When we see both, you know, isn't it the best? You have an economic interest, but you can pack it into the universal humanist value. But the only question, this is what probably Urban knows, is how long? For how long and how much? It's only about how much. So I'm just suggesting that we shouldn't be too optimistic, and I'm telling this according to my own particular individual historical experience, which is the experience of the Yugoslav war, of falling apart of this country, of the impossibility to solve politically the problems opened by the war, to deal politically with the consequences of the war, on the one side, and witnessing these days the nationalist, chauvinist, pro-fascist mobilization in Croatia, which is worse than during the war in the 90s. Just imagine, can you imagine Germany, like there is a football match on the Olympic Stadium in Berlin, and like German team would play against French and win, and one of the German players, like Schweinsteiger, would take, you know, official microphone and would come to one side of the stadium and loudly, you know, shout, Sieg, and the masses would say, respond, Heil, and he would repeat it 3 more times, 4 times in the stadium, and then, can you imagine, the president of Germany who attended the match would be asked by journalists, how was the atmosphere? And he would say, oh, excellent. This is what happens in Croatia. You know, this is, can you imagine that in Germany, the members of the Academy of Science, Art and Science, the bishops of German Catholic Church sign a petition demanding the introduction of Sieg Heil officially as how do we call it? As official Gruß, German, of the German army. Can you imagine? You cannot imagine this. But this is a normal reality in Croatia. We have been living with this, and the history has been rewritten. Can you imagine you come to Germany and the monuments of the Second World War, you know, in like Buchenwald or every, okay, Buchenwald probably not, but the thousands are destroyed. And you would see on every second wall in Berlin a swastika. You cannot imagine this. But this is a normal reality in Croatia. And of course, Germany and all the diplomatic representatives of all the European countries are fully aware of this situation. But it is recognized as a completely normal. So if this is a normality, so as I say, you know, which year we live, or I can even, you know, go a step further and say, we don't know yet who will win the Second World War. This could be, you know, a question for the future of war, because this is an open question, at least in Croatia, at least.